Imagine if your father was one of the most famous rock stars in the world. Paul McCartney was the legendary member of the Beatles, the heart of the greatest music group in history. But at home, there were 5 children, and their stories might surprise you. Paul McCartney has 5 children: Heather McCartney, Mary McCartney, Stella McCartney, James McCartney, and Beatrice McCartney. He shared 4 children with his first wife, Linda Eastman. Linda died of breast cancer in 1998. Paul later said, "I cried for a year while their father toured the world and made music for millions. The children grew up largely through their mother, Linda, and each other. From the outside, a life filled with glamour. But inside those walls, there were real struggles, from the pressure of living with a famous last name to the struggle to carve out their own paths. Each of Paul's children experienced a unique journey." Beatrice Millie McCartney. After Linda died in 1998, Paul's life was turned upside down. He mourned for years. But then he found love again. In 2002, he met former model Heather Mills. In 2003, Beatrice was born. Paul was 61 years old at the time. 61, becoming a father again. "I love being a dad," Paul said. "My days are spent getting up at 6:30, getting Beatrice ready, and having breakfast." He said he felt the excitement of raising a small child again. He wasn't tired. He enjoyed every second of it. But unfortunately, Paul and Heather Mills' marriage didn't last long. 6 years later, in 2008, they divorced. Beatrice was only 5 years old. The divorce was very ugly. It turned into a major scandal in the media, a storm that little Beatrice was caught in the middle of. Heather Mills later said, "Beatrice hates fame and the whole limelight thing. She doesn't want to be a pop star. She wants to be a marine biologist." After Paul and Heather divorced, they completely shielded Beatrice from the public eye. Photos of Beatrice are very rare. She gives no interviews. Today, Beatrice is 21 years old, Paul's youngest child, still of college age. Paul's relationship with his third wife, Nancy Shevell, is good. Beatrice is quietly carving her own path. Maybe she'll really become a marine biologist, maybe something else. But one thing is certain: living as Paul McCartney's daughter isn't easy. James Lewis McCartney, born in 1977, Linda and Paul's only son. James looks just like his father, the same facial features, the same smile, and most importantly, the same passion: music. Being born as Paul McCartney's son is both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, doors open easily. On the other hand, you're constantly compared to your father. The Beatles, the greatest group in history. Your father is a legend. What are you going to do? James chose music, but he was determined to carve his own path. From a young age, he appeared on his father's albums. He played drums. He played guitar. They even wrote some songs together. In 2010, he released his first EP, Available Light. Then came Close at Hand, followed by the complete EP collection. In 2013, his first full album, Me, came out. They produced the album together with his father, Paul. 3 years later, the second album, The Blackberry Train. James once said they asked him on the BBC, "Are you nervous because of your last name? I never thought of it that way. I'm not going to be oppressed by certain things. I'm just going to do my own thing." But here's the truth: James could never fully step out of his father's shadow. His albums received good reviews, but never achieved a major breakthrough. He gave concerts. He continued making music, but he was always known as Paul McCartney's son. His private life is quiet. He's not married. He has no children. A man in his late 40s focused on his music. What might be hardest for James? Perhaps knowing he'll never achieve what his father achieved. But maybe he doesn't care about that. Maybe making music is more important than success. Stella Nina McCartney, born in 1971, perhaps the most famous of Paul's children. Stella McCartney, world-renowned fashion designer. When she was a little girl, she was already designing her own clothes. At 12 years old, she was sewing her own dresses. At 16, she interned with Christian Lacroix in Paris. Then, she went to London's prestigious Central St. Martin's School. She had to prove herself, Paul said. "I said that if she couldn't succeed by the end of the year, the name wouldn't help, but she succeeded." At 27, 6, she became creative director of Chloe. 26, at one of the world's biggest fashion houses. In 2001, she founded her own brand, the Stella McCartney brand. But Stella isn't just a designer with a famous last name. She's a pioneer, a revolutionary. Stella has never used fur, never used leather, never used animal products. Sustainable fashion, ethical fashion, eco-friendly fashion. If I don't believe in killing animals, why would I do it for fashion? Stella said. There's no difference because in the end you're killing an animal. Like her mother Linda, Stella is also an animal rights activist. Vegetarian, she never compromised her moral values. I've had moments where I've been challenged very heavily to change my morals for the success of the company, Stella said. But why would I compromise what I believe in to enter an industry I'm passionate about? In 2018, she designed Meghan Markle's wedding reception dress. After she married Prince Harry, Stella bought back full ownership of her brand. She founded the Stella McCartney Cares Foundation for breast cancer awareness. To honor her mother, Stella is married and has 4 children: Miller, Bailey, Beckett, and Riley. And about the Nepo baby debate, Stella is very outspoken. As one of the first Nepo babies, I had the privilege of choice, she told Time magazine. I'm very aware of how lucky I've been. At least she's honest. At least she's aware. And at least she's using her privilege for good. Mariana McCartney, born in 1969, Linda and Paul's first biological child. Her name comes from Paul's mother. Paul's mother, Mary, died of breast cancer when he was 14. The thumb is a commemoration, an honor. When Mary was a little girl, her mother Linda gave her a camera, and Mary fell in love with photography. Her mother Linda was also a famous photographer. She was the first woman to have a photograph on the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. Mary followed in her mother's footsteps. Mary's work has been exhibited in galleries worldwide, published in magazines like Vogue, GQ, Rolling Stone. In 2015, she photographed Queen Elizabeth to commemorate the Queen's record-breaking reign. But Mary isn't just a photographer. She's also a director, also a writer. She wrote vegetarian cookbooks, continuing her mother's legacy. She has her own show on Food Network. Mary McCartney serves it up. Mary's personal life has also been quite a journey. She has 2 sons from her first marriage, Arthur and Elliot. Then they divorced. Her second husband is Simon Aboud, a director. 2 more sons with him, Sam and Sid. 4 sons. Paul McCartney's first grandchildren. Arthur was born in 1999. Paul became a grandfather for the first time. Mary is very close to her family, close to her father, Paul, close to her sister, Stella, close to her siblings. She lives a quiet life, doesn't appear much in the media, does her work, takes care of her family, happy. Heather Louise McCartney. Here's the most dramatic story, the most unexpected story. Heather was born in 1962 in Tucson, Arizona, but Paul McCartney is not her biological father. Heather's mother is Linda Eastman. Her father is Joseph Melville C. Jr., a geologist, American. Linda and Joseph got married. 18 months later, they separated. Heather was just a baby. Linda became a single mother, a young woman with a small daughter. In New York, Linda was a professional photographer. She photographed musicians. She photographed celebrities. In 1967, she went to London for an assignment. Swinging London, the Beatles' city. She met Paul McCartney at a club. Lightning struck between them. Paul was one of the most famous men in the world at the time. The Beatles were still together, but their end was near. Paul and Linda fell in love, a fast and deep love. March 1969, Paul and Linda got married. Heather was 6 years old, and that's the moment. Paul McCartney adopted little Heather. Heather's biological father, Joseph, didn't object. She'll have a better life as a McCartney, he said. Overnight, Heather's last name changed. She was now Heather McCartney. She appears in the Beatles' Let It Be film. She's in the Get Back documentary, a little girl, Paul's adopted daughter. In 1969, Mary was born. Heather's little sister. 2 years later, Stella. Then James. Heather suddenly became the oldest of a 4-child family. Paul McCartney's daughter, a Beatles' daughter. It wasn't easy. It was never easy. She loved her father. Paul loved her like his real daughter, but it was always different. She was adopted, not a biological child. Heather chose creative arts. First, she studied photography. She won the Young Black and White Printer of the Year award. Then she studied ceramics and design. She She became a professional potter. In 1999, she founded her own housewares brand, Heather McCartney Designs. Paul came to Atlanta to support the launch of Heather's brand. "I'm happy to be here," Paul told Entertainment Tonight. "She's a lovely girl. I'm very proud of her." The reporter asked, "Who are your biggest inspirations?" Heather answered, "My mom and dad. That's it." Even though Paul wasn't her biological father, he was her father to Heather, her real father. But Heather remained silent for years. While her siblings Stella, Mary, James appeared in public, Heather stayed in the shadows. Maybe it was a choice. Maybe it was a defense mechanism. Carrying the label Paul McCartney's adopted daughter must be difficult. In 1998, Linda died. Heather was 36 years old. She lost her mother. Paul said, "I cried for a year." How much did Heather cry? Nobody knows. She mourned silently. Today, Heather is 62 years old, not married, no children, lives in England. Her works are in art exhibitions. New York, Phoenix, Paris, Sydney, worldwide. But she's still the most secretive McCartney. She doesn't give interviews. She doesn't appear in the media. Maybe that's her strength. Silence, privacy, living on her own terms. Heather's story teaches us something. Sometimes the biggest struggles are the invisible ones. Sometimes the deepest wounds are in the quietest hearts. 5 children, 5 completely different paths. But there's a common thread in all their stories. Heather quietly created her own art. Mary continued her mother's photography legacy. Stella revolutionized sustainable fashion. James shared his love of music with his father. Beatrice is just at the beginning of her journey. None of them had a perfect life. None of them escaped the pressure of carrying a famous last name. But here's what's remarkable. Each one of them found meaning in their own way. Not because they were perfect, because they were loved. Paul McCartney made music for millions. But perhaps his greatest achievement was at home, adopting Heather, standing up after Linda's death, becoming a father again at 61. The McCartney children didn't inherit a perfect life. They inherited something better. They saw the power of art and love, and that changed everything.